There are wrestling rivalries built around championship ambition, competitive pride, and the desire to prove who is the best. Then there are rivalries that become so personal that the actual title almost starts to feel secondary. The ongoing conflict between Liv Morgan and Stephanie Vaquer has reached that point. What began as a battle over the Women's World Championship has gradually developed into a deeply personal war of words, with both women constantly looking for another way to get under the other's skin. The latest exchange has taken that tension to another level, because Morgan's comments did not simply challenge Vaquer's wrestling ability. They targeted the long road Vaquer traveled before reaching WWE. That distinction matters. Professional wrestling has always relied on strong personalities and provocative trash talk, but there is a difference between attacking an opponent's confidence and dismissing the years of work that helped build their career. This latest chapter has fans debating whether the rivalry has become more intense than entertaining. Morgan has always carried herself with confidence, and that attitude has played an important role in her championship run. Vaquer, meanwhile, has built much of her identity around perseverance and the idea that she earned every opportunity through years of hard work. Put those two personalities together, and conflict was almost inevitable. The problem is that the latest exchange feels less like two competitors trying to gain an advantage, and more like two people determined to hurt each other's pride. How the rivalry reached this point. The tension between Morgan and Vaquer did not appear overnight. It began with championship ambition, after Morgan's Royal Rumble victory put her directly into the Women's World Championship picture. Vaquer, who had spent years working toward opportunities at the highest level, viewed Morgan as someone who had enjoyed a much faster route to the spotlight. Morgan saw things differently. To her, success was not something she needed to apologize for, and she had no interest in allowing Vaquer's experience to automatically make her superior. Their opposing viewpoints created an immediate clash. Morgan represented confidence, momentum, and the belief that she belonged at the top regardless of how long it took her to get there. Vaquer represented experience, patience, and the belief that surviving years outside the biggest spotlight gave her a perspective Morgan could never understand. By the time the two finally met at WrestleMania, the championship match felt like the conclusion of a much larger argument. Morgan ultimately walked away with the title, but the victory did not settle anything. Instead, it gave both women another reason to keep the feud alive. Vaquer had lost the championship, while Morgan had gained another reason to insist that her critics were wrong. From there, every interview, confrontation, and social media exchange seemed to add another layer to their growing resentment. The physical side made things even more serious. Before the latest verbal confrontation, this rivalry had already included several moments that made it clear neither competitor was willing to simply walk away. One backstage confrontation became particularly intense, with both women getting caught in a physical struggle that left the situation looking far more serious than an ordinary wrestling segment. Moments like that can dramatically change the way an audience views a feud. Wrestling is built around physical competition, but there is still an expectation that the performers are working toward a shared story. When a confrontation appears to become genuinely heated, viewers naturally begin wondering where the performance ends and the real emotion begins. That uncertainty has followed Morgan and Vaquer throughout this rivalry. Their matches have become increasingly aggressive, their verbal exchanges increasingly direct, and their personal differences increasingly difficult to separate from the championship storyline. That is why the latest comments have attracted so much attention. Fans are not reacting only to one insult or one social media post. They are reacting to months of tension that have gradually pushed these two competitors further apart. Every new exchange feels like another step toward a confrontation where neither woman is interested in proving a point anymore. They simply want to make sure the other person feels defeated. The social media exchange changed the conversation. The latest controversy began innocently enough, with Morgan celebrating her championship reign and expressing confidence about eventually becoming one of the longest-reigning women's world champions. It was exactly the kind of boast fans have come to expect from a champion who believes she has earned her place at the top. Vaquer responded by questioning the strength of that reign, pointing toward the limited number of championship defenses and suggesting that holding a title means very little if you are not regularly putting it on the line. That response was sharp, but it was still centered on wrestling. Vaquer challenged Morgan's credibility as champion. Morgan could have answered by pointing toward her victories, reminding Vaquer that she had already beaten her, or simply telling her to step into the ring and take the championship back. Instead, the response became far more personal. Morgan mocked the different paths the two women had taken through wrestling and used Vaquer's long journey as ammunition. That was the moment the conversation changed. Suddenly, the debate was no longer about who deserved the championship. It was about whether there should be boundaries even in the most heated wrestling rivalry. Vaquer has her own answer. Vaquer's response has been much easier to understand because she continues to bring the conversation back to wrestling. Her argument is simple. Experience matters, sacrifice matters, and the fact that she spent years working before reaching WWE should not be something anyone uses against her. She has made it clear that she believes she could have already reclaimed the championship if circumstances had been different, and that confidence gives the rivalry another fascinating dimension. Vaquer does not need to convince everyone that her journey was harder than Morgan's. She only needs to prove that she can still compete at the highest level. That is where the story should ultimately return. Championships are decided in the ring, not by social media arguments. If Vaquer believes Morgan has not defended the title enough, the perfect response is to earn another opportunity and take the championship away from her. If Morgan believes Vaquer's experience has been overrated, then defeating her again would provide the strongest possible answer. The beauty of professional wrestling is that all the talking eventually has to lead somewhere. Eventually, the two women have to meet face to face, bell to bell, with no post, interview, or argument able to decide the outcome for them. Becky Lynch adds another layer. The situation becomes even more interesting, with Becky Lynch now back in the championship picture. Her return changes the balance of power, because Morgan can no longer focus exclusively on Vaquer. Becky brings her own history, credibility, and championship ambitions into an already crowded division. For Vaquer, that creates another challenge, because she now has to navigate a championship scene filled with major personalities. For Morgan, it creates an entirely different problem. Every new contender gives her another reason to defend her title and another opportunity for someone to expose a weakness. The presence of Becky also prevents the feud from becoming completely isolated. Instead of being only a personal argument between Morgan and Vaquer, it now sits inside a much larger championship story. That could ultimately be the best thing for everyone involved. The personal tension can remain, but the championship needs to stay at the center of the narrative. After all, the ultimate goal should be to create a match fans desperately want to see without making the story feel uncomfortable for the wrong reasons. The line between intensity and cruelty. There is nothing wrong with a wrestling rivalry being intense. In fact, some of the greatest rivalries in the business were built on competitors who genuinely seemed determined to destroy each other's confidence. The important part is maintaining enough balance that the audience understands what the story is trying to accomplish. Morgan and Vaquer have already established that they dislike each other. They have already proven that neither one is willing to back down. At this point, They do not need to keep escalating every insult simply for shock value. The most powerful next step would be to let the wrestling speak. Let Vaquer answer the criticism with a performance. Let Morgan defend her championship against another serious challenger. Let Becky Lynch complicate the picture. Then, when Morgan and Vaquer finally collide again, the history behind the match will make every punch, counter, and near fall feel meaningful without requiring another deeply personal attack. That would turn this feud from controversy into compelling wrestling storytelling. What happens next? So now, the question is simple. Where does this rivalry go from here? Morgan remains determined to prove that she belongs at the top. Vaquer remains determined to prove that her years of experience cannot be dismissed. And Becky Lynch has entered the picture at precisely the wrong time for anyone hoping for an easy path to the championship. The ingredients are already there for one of the biggest women's championship stories of the year, but the next chapter needs to focus on what these women can accomplish inside the ring. The personal history has already been established. The arguments have already been made. The audience knows exactly why Morgan and Vaquer cannot stand each other. Now it is time to find out who can actually back up those words when the championship is on the line. Because at the end of the day, Morgan can claim she is untouchable. Vaquer can remind everyone how long she has been fighting for this opportunity, and Becky can declare that she is coming for the title. None of it matters until the bell rings, and when it finally does, the woman who walks away with the championship will have the only answer that truly counts.